welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall. Stop it already. I already proposed saying, might as well put your face up now. Show the world why I can't keep a straight face on our intro, man. Anyway, welcome back, folks. Rabbi Chaim Coffman here as usual, cracking me up as usual. But anyway, that's fun. We always have a good time here, so that's good. But
I wasn't looking at anything.
No.
Really, it's not my fault.
That's all I could think of is whenever you did that, because earlier you said you know, laughing at me. I wasn't even looking at you. The problem is I've got you taking up a full monitor, and I'm sitting here looking out the corner of my eye, and you're sitting there cracking up.
I feel sorry for the monitor. I'll start praying right now.
That was so funny. Oh boy, oh boy. Anyway, so here we go. So this is kind of like part 2 to last week, but we didn't call it that because it probably isn't. But illegitimate children according to Torah, whatever else kind of connects with that. So not sure how far you can take it, but take it as far as you can.
Come on, you give me 3 hours. I can take it somewhere.
All right, it's all yours.
Welcome. It's always pleasure. Always pleasure to be here. We spoke last week, about we call it spiritual cooties. This idea about family purity laws. Spoke a lot of different things. I noticed that towards the end.
Rabbi, tilt your camera down.
Rabbi,
tilt your camera down again. I think your camera is drifting back up again. There you go.
Down or up?
Yeah, down. Okay, yeah. It's going to start drifting up again. That's okay. It's better than I got this. You just go ahead and talk.
Yeah.
Yep, you're good.
So, so we spoke about family purity laws, and I saw there were questions about mamzer, right? A mamzer, normally wrongly translated as a bastard child, right? That technically, what would I say? I would say that it's two people. They could be theoretically married. They don't have to be, right? Or unmarried individuals have a child, right? What do we call that child? We call it a child born out of wedlock. But that's not what a mamzer is, right? A mamzer is an offspring of someone who has a relationship with someone else, right? A man and a female, male and a female, and it's a forbidden relationship. And the relationship is punished by kares. Kares means that they get spiritually cut off, or what they call excision. But whatever it means, being spiritually cut off. It could be close blood relatives, or a woman. A more common case probably is a woman who's married, right? She's married right now, and she has a child from someone else. Right, someone else who's not her husband. All right, that would make somebody a mamzer, and there are a lot of ramifications, a number of ramifications. Now, the obvious way out of this problem, right, is for a woman, if she doesn't like being with her husband, all things being equal, she should get divorced, because the Torah tells me I'm allowed to get divorced, right, regardless of what others may tell you. There is a bill of divorce. Torah tells me, right, if you can't work it out and, there's no way to salvage the marriage, okay, we don't want to see divorce, but there is divorce. Divorce, unfortunately, on the rise in the ultra-Orthodox community, but still nothing compared, to the secular world. But, we've already spoken about that, but that would take care of the problem. It doesn't matter if you go to secular courts and you get a secular divorce. So that's good according to the state, right? According to the country, that's not good enough for Judaism. In other words, even if you're separate, even if you have a bill of divorce in the secular court, that is not a bill of divorce according to the Torah. Now, if that person is separate, right, and they're living separate lives, this woman meets somebody else, she has a child, that child's a mamzer, because secular law has no weight over here. A husband has to give his wife a bill of divorce. If he gives the bill of divorce, there are no issues, right? If it's a proper bill of divorce, there is no issue. There would be no case of a mamzer, right? The question is going to be if a bill of divorce, let's say, wasn't given, And in this case, it wasn't given. Technically, she's still married, right? Even if she has a secular divorce, doesn't matter, right? According to the Torah, she's still married, and she cannot be with anybody else, right? It doesn't mean the husband really can be with anyone else either, right? But if she's with somebody else and has a child, that's a big problem, right? That is going to be this case. Now, so I'll tell a little bit of a scary story, and it doesn't mean just about getting divorced. There was a woman whose husband, she was married, and her husband disappeared. He just disappeared. Then, one day, picked up, left. No one heard from him for a long time. So this woman went to the rabbinical court. She went to the Beis Din, and after a while, since this husband was nowhere to be found, right? They assume either, he's dead, he's lost at sea. They had no idea where he was, and for years, this guy's gone. So they gave her permission to remarry. Now, obviously, there are specific conditions that someone's allowed to remarry. Obviously, you need to have proper knowledge when to allow this, etc. What happened in this case? This woman's a religious woman. She remarries, and she has kids. She has grandkids. 25 years later, true story, because Rabbi told me the story. 25 years later, the first husband shows up. They thought he was gone, dead, I don't know, wherever. And he now shows up. So they allowed her to get married. She has kids. She now has grandkids. All these kids that she had are now mamzerim. Right? We're going to see what the repercussions are, who they can marry, who they can't marry. But there's a big problem. Right? Well, I have to explain, because a mamzer is only allowed to marry two people. They're only allowed to marry someone of that same union, right? Someone who came from a similar union, or they're allowed to marry a convert. Now, people are going to jump up and down. We'll speak about why a convert. What? Convert, someone who converts. What are they? Second-class citizens? What? They don't have the same pedigree. They don't have the same pedigree as this Jew. So what? I have a blemish on my soul, so I have to marry this, this mamzer. I can only marry this mamzer, right? We'll discuss it, right? We're not going to shy away from that. If I get enough time here, I got 2 hours, so we're good. So in general, so my Rebbe got this question: what do you do?
I heard that.
Yeah, I know. I want to make sure you're still there.
Oh yeah.
So 25 years later, this husband shows up, right? So now these children, right? These children from this marriage who are already married and have kids, they have to uproot their marriages, right? Because the people that they married, don't have this blemish. They absolutely don't have this blemish. So my Rebbe's telling me this story, and he says, I'm gonna try and find some permissibility. So he said, what would you say? I said black and white. It's the mamzer. It's a classic case, right? That doesn't matter how it happens. Even though the Beis Din ruled and they said you get remarried, they made a mistake, right? Beis Dins can make mistakes. Rabbis are not infallible. I am, but most rabbis are not infallible, right? They can make mistakes. This is a pretty crucial mistake, right? Why they allowed this woman to get remarried? What was the evidence? I don't know. I wasn't privy to that information, but my Rebbe told me, he said, I'm going to try and find, some way out of this problem. And in the end, so I kept bugging him, because that's what I'm good at. So I kept bugging him, what's the deal? Did you find anything? And he said no. And he kept going, and finally he turned over the case, to the Torah giant of the generation, Rabbi Elyashiv, of blessed memory. And he said, it would be my obligation to uproot these families. And he said, I can't do that. He said, I don't have the stomach to do it. So he gave it over to someone else, and I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened after that. So either you have to give a proper bill of divorce. That takes you out of the problem altogether, right? Or, God forbid, you have a case like this, right? If a person's spouse disappeared, again, there is an obligation. The Torah tells me I have an obligation to listen to the rabbis in every generation. Now, in this case, they made a mistake, right? They made a serious mistake over here. So, nonetheless, it doesn't alter the facts, right? You have all these families, kids, grandkids, all learning yeshiva, right? They're all ultra-Orthodox Jews, right? According to the Torah, got to uproot them, right? Seemingly, we have to uproot them. This may not be as uncommon, today, right? As a person may think, right? I'll explain why, but I just want to bring you the Torah source. The Torah source is Deuteronomy chapter 23, where it talks about forbidden and restricted marriages. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3. It says, a mamzer shall not enter the congregation of Hashem, even his 10th generation shall not enter the congregation of Hashem. Forever. That was me. Forever, right? He can never enter the congregation.
So why does it say 10th generation?
It says until the 10th generation. It said even his 10th generation. Doesn't say until.
But does it say forever though?
No, I added that.
Okay.
But it says also the 10th generation. Also the 10th generation means and beyond, right? It could have said forever. Torah doesn't, right? Interesting why the Torah doesn't. But it always says even his 10th generation. Now, it doesn't mean up until the 10th generation. That would be an easy way out, right? But even the 10th generation means even beyond, right? So that's going to be, so my language, that would mean forever, right? It's something that is never going to change. There is no way out. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter if you're in the land of Israel. It doesn't matter, if you're in Kingsland, Texas. It doesn't matter if you're in Boston, Massachusetts. You're in France, Swaziland, anywhere, right? Totally irrelevant. Applies at all times in all places. Now, there are going to be social challenges, which we'll see. But a mamzer, you might think, well, he's not a full-fledged Jew. Not true. Because we know, as the Talmud tells us, that he can achieve unbelievable spiritual greatness. And it says a mamzer is a Torah scholar, the rabbis tell us, precedes an ignorant high priest. So a mamzer can be an unbelievable Torah scholar. He can even be greater than the high priest. Now, he won't be able to serve as the high priest, but he can be greater in knowledge than a high priest that is ignorant. So we understand, and, let's make clear, we do not judge a person by his circumstances. This person did nothing wrong, right? He came from a forbidden union, right? But what do we judge a person by? We judge a person by what they do. The circumstances may never change. And even if they never change, it does not negate the fact a person can reach a high spiritual level. So, we can look at it and say, that, he can reach an unbelievable level, right? He can be spiritually better than most people in the generation. Regardless of that, the status doesn't change. Now, it's interesting. You look at the word mamzer, right? You got two mems, a zayin, and a resh, right? Maybe I should give a class in Hebrew here, right? Mamzer, so you got two mems, and a zayin, and a resh. If I take away the two mems, I'm left with a zayin and a resh. The word zar. What does the word zar mean? Word zar means a stranger or an outsider. Book of Zechariah talks about that a mamzer should dwell in Ashdod, and I'll cut off his pride. I'll cut off the pride of the Philistines, right? The reference Jewish people who were strangers. That's why it's talking about a mamzer, not from a forbidden union, but in the language of being a stranger, i.e., arch enemies of the Philistines, right? Who were traditionally called Ashdod, right? They called Ashdod their home. So good. So now I understand a mamzer is never going to change his status, right? We'll see. Well, we'll see if that's the case, right? He's not going to change the status per se, and seemingly he can only marry a convert or someone of the same status. Now, someone may ask, how does that apply today? So it could be if a person comes from this type of union, right? Not everyone's living in Victorian England over here. It could be that someone came from this forbidden union. Now, if it's a forbidden union and the person grows up as the secular Jew, he doesn't know any better, right? Certainly doesn't know any better. So if he doesn't know any better, he'll marry anybody, right? It's not going to matter. Now, what would happen if he doesn't know his status, got a problem, right? Well, what's the problem? What happens if this Jew later on becomes an Orthodox Jew, right? There's a common thing also. Let's say someone was adopted, right? Someone was adopted and they find out as they're becoming more observant that, what's their status? Are they Jewish or they're not Jewish? Because even if the parents are Jewish, they raise the child, you don't go by them, you go by who the birth mother is, right? And whoever the birth mother is, if the mother's Jewish, child's Jewish, right? Because you always know who the mother is, right? The tribe goes by the father. We mentioned last week, and the Jewishness is going to go by the mother. So good. So if I know who the mother is, so I know what the status of the child is. But if somebody is adopted, they may think their whole life, even if they grow up Reform, they grow up conservative, they still think they're Jewish. They don't think there's any issue. Raised by my parents, even if they know they're adopted. So that even if their adopted parents are Jewish, they eat gefilte fish their whole life. They heard the shofar, they ate a little bit of matzah. They think they're Jewish. Problem is, it goes by the mother. So if they find out their biological mother isn't Jewish, so what do? So if they're becoming religious, they have to convert, right? The conversion will be a relatively straightforward process. In general, the person is becoming more observant, etc. Well, it shouldn't take as long because, if the person's already observing, etc. Now they find out there's the problem in the lineage. But be that as it may, they'll go through, if they want to, they'll go through that process. But a person who's not religious, grows up not religious, and then all of a sudden starts to learn about Torah, they say, hey, what's the story? What's the status? What's my status? Am I really Jewish? Because they find out that the mother has to be Jewish, but their mother's not their mother. It's only the stepmother, right? They find, they have to find out, open up the file, see if the birth mother is Jewish. Birth mother is Jewish, no problem. Birth mother is not Jewish, got an issue. Right, you're for sure gonna have an issue, so therefore you'd have to go through conversion. So that being the case, there are a number of people I met along my journeys over the years that went through conversion, right? Because they were adopted and they found out that that the birth mother wasn't Jewish. So today, a mamzer can come from this union, right? They find out they're becoming more religious. They find out, they learn about this, and they say, guess what? It happened to me. This is my status. So we said over here, they can never enter the congregation. Now, this is why you need oral law over here, and you need great rabbinical shoulders. So Moshe Feinstein, of blessed memory, the Torah giant of the last generation in America, would have been a Torah giant probably in any generation, a unbelievable Torah giant, no question. And he's got a number of responses that writes about different cases, right? About different cases of someone who was born from a forbidden union, whether the child had the status of being Jewish or not. There's some horrific cases there. Some that I was looking at earlier. Some, whatever. We're not gonna put them on air. We'll have to. We gotta rate this show, so we can't put them on air. But there was some. So there's an issue over here of the fact that the child came from this union. Now, if the child's becoming religious and he comes across this, now what's the first thing? What's the first thing they're gonna think? They think, well, what about my parents? Right? My parents did this, right? Or my mother did this. Let's say better. Right? She did this. She's not religious per se. And, if that's the case, does this status really hold true? Now you're going to say, what's the difference if the mother's religious or not? Oh, there's a major difference. The major difference is that when a Jew gets married, I should have made this really clear last week. When a Jew gets married, right, the bride walks down the aisle, she circles around her husband 7 times, and there are blessings that are made under the canopy. And after the first 2 blessings made under the canopy, the groom, right, according to us, or other Orthodox tradition, what does the groom do? He gives a ring, right, or something worth value, right? He shows it to the that has to be witnesses. Witnesses have to see him give the ring, right? The ring has to be worth what they call a shava pruta, the worth of a pruta. It doesn't have to be worth very much. They hold up the ring, they showed it to witnesses. They say, would you pay a pruta for this? Like, yeah, looks like I pay a pruta for that. Yeah, it's got value. Good. So they give it to the groom, and the groom makes this declaration, right? What's the declaration? He says, you are consecrated to me. He says to his future wife, or his wife-to-be, and he says, you are consecrated to me like the laws of Moshe and the Jewish people. Right? Sounds pretty authentic. Right? He's going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah, the whole shebang. So what does he do? He takes the ring, he makes the declaration, and now the witnesses are watching, right? They got their beady little eyes there. They're watching, and he says, you are sanctified to me. He says the statement and puts the ring on her finger. So what are the witnesses there doing? They watch. They have to give testimony, right? I mean, not literal. They have to watch it. If they miss it, got to do it again, right? But they have to see the ring go on the finger, right? It's all part of the acquisition, and through the acquisition, I need witnesses. So I need witnesses for that. I need witnesses for her to pick up the marriage document, right? All she has to do is take this marriage document. Let's say it's my pen here, right? All she has to do is just lift it up a little bit. That's it. She acquires it. The witnesses see it. The witnesses have one other job. The one other job is after all the blessings are made, they go in what we call a cheder yichud. What's a cheder yichud? It is a cheder yichud. It is a room. It is a room where the bride and groom are alone for the first time, right? So what do? The witnesses go in, make sure there are no other people in there, there's nothing in there, etc. They usually eat in there, etc. So the witnesses look in the room, they shut the door. They probably lock the door from the inside, which is probably a good thing, right? They'll lock the door, and the witnesses stand there for, let's say 5 minutes, 7 minutes, usually not more than that. Right, that's the amount of time you need. They're considered married. Everything's good. So you got to say, this is the craziest thing you ever said. What does this have to do with a mamzer? Right? What's the connection? So the connection is, if this secular person now becomes religious, and he understands he's got the status of a mamzer. Now the question is, okay, his mother was with somebody she wasn't allowed to be with. Question is, and she's married, right? She's married in this case, or it's a forbidden union, right? Whatever it's going to be. In this case, if she's married, right, then were there witnesses at her wedding, right? 2 secular Jews. Did they have a kosher witness? I should have made that clear. The witness who witnesses the giving of the ring and the lifting up of the ketubah of the marriage document has to be by 2 witnesses that keep Shabbos. They have to be 2 kosher Jews, right? A secular Jew in this case has no believability, none, right? So therefore, there probably weren't any kosher witnesses. Now, a kosher witness also means, should have made this clear also, that a kosher witness means somebody who is not a cousin, a relative. They cannot be related, right? They can't be related, and they can't be blemished where they can't give testimony, right? They wouldn't be able to give testimony, right? A secular Jew can't give testimony if he desecrates Shabbos in public. Why? He's got the status of a non-Jew, right? A non-Jew can give testimony for certain things, right? We're not going to allow it for this. This is something else. So if you don't have any kosher witnesses, it doesn't mean they're not married, right? Certainly by a non-Jew, if they live together without anything, according to the Rambam, they're definitely married. They want to get divorced. They don't need a bill of divorce. He just walks away. That's it, right? That's the bill of divorce by non-Jews, right? By a Jew, not exactly the same, right? A Jew needs sanctification, needs kedushin, he needs marriage, etc. But in general, even if there are no witnesses, right? That's what makes it legitimate here. If there are no witnesses, the $1 million question is, okay, are they still married? Are they considered married? Now, they may live like a married couple, but they didn't go through the formality. So some people will say, well, the institution of marriage not so successful today, certainly in the secular world. They'll say, I'll forego it, right? Well, I'll forego it. I won't bother, right? We'll live together and that's it. A Jew doesn't have that option. A Jew has an obligation, right? Certainly a man has an obligation to be married. It's better for a woman, Talmud says, for her to be married than not be married. We mentioned that last week. But again, that doesn't mean you're going to marry just anybody. But in general, if they are married and they're considered married, so there are serious repercussions, right? There are a lot of repercussions. One of them is this status. What if she's an adulterer? If she's an adulterer and has a child. But what if she's an adulterer, has a child, and there were never any kosher witnesses? See, we're going to tick a lot of people off here. There weren't any kosher witnesses. So if there are no other kosher witnesses at the wedding, says Moshe Feinstein, the marriage is not a marriage. Even if you have, quote unquote, a rabbi there, he's not a kosher witness, right? He doesn't keep Shabbos. Most conservative Reform Jews, they don't keep Shabbos. They don't keep very much, of anything. They'll keep it at their level, what they do, what they don't do. Not the topic for now. But he can't be a good witness, certainly not. You could have, 20 of those rabbis there. Doesn't mean anything, right? If you have no kosher witnesses, the marriage isn't a marriage. So it says Moshe Feinstein, if the marriage isn't a marriage, technically, according to the Torah, doesn't mean they're not living together. Right? Doesn't mean they're not doing, whatever married people do. Nonetheless, what's their status? What's the status of the child? Says Moshe Feinstein, I don't have an issue. I don't have an issue because there's no kedushin. There's no sanctification. There's no marriage. Right? There's no blessings under the canopy. You're going to say, really? Come on, what do the rabbis know? What are they doing? They're messing things up. Why are they confusing things? Let me just walk down the aisle, throw the rice, have a great time. Don't bring me up this mumbo jumbo. Yeah, but the reality is this is a serious issue. And if you didn't have Moshe Feinstein to come along and come up with this novel idea, I mean, not so, I wouldn't say necessarily so novel, but, looking at a secular Jewish marriage. If you're looking at a secular Jewish marriage, in this case, right? In this case, for example, you are going to save a lot of Jews, a tremendous amount of Jews. Why? Because they could be born under this pretense. If they're born under this pretense, what's the problem? They can only marry, Talmud says, who can they marry? They can only marry someone of the same union or a convert. So now we'll pick on converts here for a second. Why convert? Right? A convert's going to say, aren't I a Jew? Aren't I a legitimate Jew? 100%. Right? Doesn't mean they're not a legitimate Jew. The difference is that either a person is going to marry this mamzer who is blemished. In other words, they're blemished in the same way. Even though you tell me a convert is like a katan shenola dummy, a child that's a newborn child, right? So if you tell me they're like a newborn child, they wipe away all the transgressions, anything they might have done, right, in their life. Nonetheless, even though we say their soul was at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given, it just got messed up through intermarriage, through assimilation, right? Nonetheless, what's their status? Okay, they are Jewish, but everyone would understand if they look at themselves in the face, no offense, they know where they came from. So knowing where they came from, their status is somewhat blemished, right? It is. You're going to say, but can a convert reach very high spiritual levels, much greater than Jews in many ways? Yes, right? We're not denying that. What we're denying is pedigree, right? And pedigree means that, you'll tell me, well, the only difference is that you were born Jewish. I said, yeah, membership has privileges like and so, American Express, right? They still have the same commercial. Membership has privileges, right? So if you're not part of the tribe, you enter the tribe, right? So you started off a number of steps behind. If you started off a number of steps behind, it doesn't mean just because I went, I dunked, I went to the mikveh, or I went to the ocean, or I went wherever, right? In order to become a kosher Jew, it doesn't mean all of a sudden, ipso facto, everything changes. They get a different part of their soul. That's very true, right? But still, they have a certain blemish. It doesn't mean they can't, reach high spiritual levels. I'm not saying that. The idea is that someone who's got this blemish, it's a spiritual blemish, right? Definitely a spiritual blemish. It's not the fault of the child in any way, shape, or form. There's a status, right? There's, this is spiritual cooties part 2. There's a spiritual status over here. And it's a terrible thing. Right? It's a terrible thing for a child to have to go through. Even when they grow up, doesn't matter. They're only allowed to marry someone in that same situation, right? Or a convert, right? So that being the case, comes along Rav Moshe Feinstein, and Rav Moshe Feinstein fixed up 99% of all cases, right? Any case, pretty much in America, in Europe, or anywhere where the wife, had infidelity, and had a child. So since that we don't look at them as quote unquote really being Jewishly married, even though they are Jews, right? So therefore that takes away the problem because it's not a real marriage. If it's not a real marriage, I don't have a problem of a mamzer. Now, just while I'm on that topic, we'll throw out a few other caveats. We'll keep it PG-13, right? We'll keep it PG-13. There are a number of interesting cases. Sometimes here in Israel, in other places, let's say you have 2 secular Jews get married. Now, if you have 2 secular Jews get married, it does not necessarily mean they're going to keep family purity laws, as we spoke about last week. Even though it's on the books here that someone gets married, they have to at least learn. They have to learn a certain amount of time these laws. Doesn't matter if they're going to keep them, they're not going to keep them. But the problem is if they get married, right? Let's say they get properly married. There are proper witnesses that witness the marriage. Now, what happens if a woman has infidelity and then a woman has a child, right? That's going to cause problems. It's going to cause a child to be a mamzer, right? If it's a kosher wedding. So what some people will do, not everybody, not all rabbis will do this. They'll put witnesses that are not allowed to be witnesses. Let's say they'll have 2 relatives, right? They'll have 2 relatives. You can't put them together. You cannot put them together to be witnesses for this. So let's say they put 2 relatives or someone else that is not allowed to be a witness, and they put them as witnesses on the marriage document, on the ketubah. Now you're going to say, how could somebody do that? You're putting, and I wouldn't say you're putting a stumbling block, in front of them, but what you're doing is you're saving them from future issues. Because the reality is you don't expect them to become religious, right? That's probably not going to happen. But a lot of rabbis don't want to do that because what happens if they become religious? Because if they become religious, then they're not really married. So then you get a bigger problem. So that's why a lot of rabbis aren't going to do it. But there is an issue. There is an issue that some rabbis will do that, so the marriage won't be legit. And if there's a child out, if there's an illegitimate child, let's say there's infidelity by the woman, then that's a problem, right? Then you're going to get into the status. Then you're going to get in the status of a mamzer. There's another case. My Rebbe told me of another case many years ago. Very interesting case. A woman gets married. She has a brother that is religious, and you can't make this stuff up. because you just can't. Fact is always greater than fiction. One of my great statements I always say. And the sister tells the brother she's getting married, and she tells the brother, I'm going to have an open marriage, right? So most of us, having grown up in Victorian England, we understand what an open marriage means, right? They're going to be with other partners, etc. Just in case anyone doesn't know. And so this person asked my Rebbe, well, is it better I put these bad witnesses, you get witnesses that are not allowed to be there, right? Sorry, not allowed to be on the marriage document, and do that instead of, potential problems, in the future. So one of my Rebbe answered, very, very interesting. He said, even though your sister said that, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, right? In other words, you don't know for sure. You definitely don't know for sure that's what they're going to do, even if they say it. They say, no, my sister's like this, she, whatever she says, she does, blah, blah, doesn't necessarily mean that, right? So he says, you don't know for sure, you can't do that. So he's very much against, for a number of reasons, of putting these, these bad witnesses on a document, on a marriage document, in order to save, to save in the future. So we see a lot of the problems can be fixed up, as we mentioned by Moshe Feinstein. There's another issue. Let's say you have a mamzer, and I don't know, you can't find anyone to marry, a convert or someone of the same union. So he says, fine, I'm not going to get married, but I want to fix up my kids, right? Let's say his kid's a mamzer, right? And he wants to fix up his kids. How can he fix up his kids? Again, same thing, right? Similar union or marry a convert, but there's another way. So the Talmud says if that child marries a slave, right? If that child would marry a slave and have a child, then that breaks the negativity over here, so to speak. In other words, that even though the mamzer is with a slave, that slave has a child, that child's no longer a mamzer, right? That gets the child out of the problem. That will not get the mamzer out of the problem. So I was once talking to my Rebbe about this, and he said there's only one place in the world where you can acquire slaves legally. So I thought about it. I said, well, where's that? And he said Saudi Arabia. So at that time, I was learning with him one-on-one the laws of the Rambam, the Sefer Mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs of the Rambam. So he said, what, you don't know that in Saudi Arabia you can get slaves legally, according to international law? I don't know if it's changed or not, but whatever, that was the claim. So he looked at me and he says, well, I'm teaching you these laws of the Rambam, the mitzvahs of the Rambam. He says, I see you don't know anything about history. He said, I should teach you about Jewish history, world history. He said, I see you know nothing about history. So he looks at me and goes, so didn't you tell me you got a degree in one of these like fancy universities? He goes, what'd you get a degree in? I was like, never mind. It doesn't really matter. He goes, what'd you get a degree in? Very British. Like, what'd you get a degree in? I was like, history. He's like, I see you know nothing about history. He says, I think you should call up your parents and tell them they wasted all this money on a degree. I'm like, yeah, I'll give you the phone. I was like, you can call them and tell them that. But that's the only way, right? The only place where it's legal to do that, according to international law, right? I have to see if that's changed or not, right? Would be in Saudi Arabia. So the person himself, let's make clear, the person himself cannot get fixed up. If he had children, right, with the slave, that would take care of the problem. The children wouldn't be mamzerim anymore, right? For him, okay, it doesn't help, right? But that would be a way to fix up, that situation. Now, I'm sure many Baalei Tshuva, people who return to Judaism that, grew up secular, I'm sure many people have this case, right? It's not uncommon. Same thing if someone was adopted, right? If someone was adopted, same thing. Right, it gets more complicated if you can't find out who the birth mother is, right? Sometimes the the thing will be sealed and they can't open it up. It can happen. So in that case, if you're not sure, so then you probably have to go through what we call a strict conversion, and the person was brought up Jewish, so just the person becoming religious anyway, so they'll convert them. But in general, that would take care of, that problem. So those are common issues, number of common issues with with Bali Tshuva, and in the case of a mamzer, the case of someone who's adopted. Now again, we have to understand that in this case, normally we say that the sins of the father don't go on the children. Now, normally that's the case if the child, as Talmud says, the child does not go in the same path as the parents. In other words, the parents have bad character traits, and the child does not go in that path, then that does not apply. If the child goes in the wrong, goes in that path, then that will apply, right? But over here, it's not in the child's hand. Over here, the child did nothing wrong, right? Nonetheless, if the child did nothing wrong, there still are going to be repercussions. Now, we mentioned earlier, the interesting thing, we mentioned earlier that mamzer was used as a reference to the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people were strangers and actually arch enemies of the Philistines, and the Philistines traditionally called Ashdod home, so that's what it's referring to over there. And the Philistines, remember, Philistines captured the Holy Ark, right? What did they do? They took it to their home, right? Took it to Ashdod. They put it, and what did they do with the Ark? They put it in the temple of their idol. Beautiful, right? Take this Holy Ark and they stick it in the temple of their idol. And Philistines had all kinds of problems after they did this. The idol got broke, right? I guess had sprung a leak or something. The idol was broken on the floor. Philistines suffer unbelievable ailments, right? So you'll ask, okay, why use that language? Why say over here Jewish people are compared or are called a mamzer? Again, the end of the word of mamzer is zar. Zar means a stranger, right? So the question is, what's really, what we'll go a little bit deeper. What does that mean, right? Exactly. So the Zohar says, go a little bit of Kabbalah here, not too much, and that is that there's a scale in heaven that are full of souls, right? Great souls, weaker souls, right? Obviously, if you're up there, you have at least you had a portion of the world to come. So you've done enough good things to be up there. We're talking about, great souls. And what happens when things are good in this world, right? As we may know, where does the scale tip? Scale tips to the side of good. When evil things happen or things are less optimal, what happens? Evil dominates, right? The scale's always going up and down, right? It's either going down on the side of good or down, God forbid, on the side of evil. But there are other types of souls. What are these other types of souls? These are powerful souls that their radiance is harmful to the evil side, right? Imagine this huge burst of light. Someone who's evil can't take it, right? It's overbearing. It's blinding, right? Just like what did the Philistines take? Philistines took the Holy Ark, right? When they took the Holy Ark and you stick it in a place where there are idols, what did the Holy Ark do? Decimated them. Not only decimated their idols, right? Remember, it caused them to suffer all kinds of terrible things. So when you have that strong amount of goodness, evil cannot stand it. One example, there's a famous story. We spoke about this once before. It's a famous story about a dibuk, right? What is a dibuk? Normally, a person dies, their soul gets judged, it'll have to go to hell, it'll have to get purified, so to speak, have to go through purification. After it goes through purification, it should have a portion of the world to come. Obviously, there's something left of the soul. But in general, what sometimes can happen is the soul part of the punishment, it could be, running around and being chased by destructive souls that are trying to rip it to shreds, right? It has no resting place until God decides, till whatever it has to go through. So there have been cases in history. What happens? The soul enters another body, right? That's what we call a dibuk. The soul enters another body. So what do? Is say exorcism. You got to get the soul out, right? Because then the soul starts to speak and it pushes the other soul aside, etc. So there have been a few cases in history, of this, of this. So there was one, I think, in the time of the Chofetz Chaim. The time of the Chofetz Chaim, you're talking more than 800 years ago, almost more than 100 years ago. And in the time of the Chofetz Chaim, so everybody knew how holy he was, and these rabbis trying to get this dibuk, this soul, out of this body, and obviously if it leaves the body, these other destructive angels trying to destroy it, right? So obviously it doesn't want to go anywhere because the angels can't destroy it if it's in the body. So they're trying to get it out. Finally, they told this soul, they said, listen, if you don't get out of this body, we're gonna give you a few minutes. But if you don't get out of this body, we are gonna bring the Chofetz Chaim here, right? We're gonna bring him here. And the soul went berserk. Went absolutely, it's like, no, don't, whatever. And eventually the soul left. Why? Why do I mention that? I know, it's a good story. Why do I mention that? I mention that because evil, right? Evil cannot stand the light of good, right? So over here, if you have this powerful radiance, this unbelievable radiance of spirituality, evil goes into hiding. Evil goes by the wayside, can't take it, right? This is what happened. You stick the ark into a house of idolatry, it goes berserk, right? The idols get destroyed. Philistines suffer, right? Unbelievable. So it's interesting. If you take the word mamzer, we'll go a little bit gematria. What is gematria? Gematria means that every letter has a numerical value, right? Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3. Let's see if I know the whole alphabet. Dalet is 4, right? What's the numerical value of mamzer, right? Mem, Zion, Resh. So Mem is 40. Mem is 40, that's 80, right? Zion is 8, right? And Resh is 200, right? They get 288, right? 288, what is 288 a reference to? According to Kabbalah, the reference is mystical sparks of holiness been scattered all over the world. Now, what happens to these mystical sparks? These sparks get elevated, right? In other words, the Jews in the desert, we use this as an example. The Jews in the desert, when in the book of Numbers, it tells you where they went, all the stations. They went here, then they went there, they encamped there, they encamped there. Right? As we say in Boston, who the heck cares? What do I care? They went here, they went there, they went there. So you look a little bit deeper, they had to go to all these places in order to take out certain sparks, right? There were certain sparks of holiness, in these areas, and they had to go and bring that out. So you have all these sparks all over the world. These sparks get elevated. They get elevated. So the more they get elevated, the more they help perfect God's original purpose for creation, right? Remember, when God created the world, what was the purpose? To put man in the Garden of Eden, and that's it. And if man wouldn't have eaten from the tree, it's all over, right? The world did exactly what God wanted it to do, and that's it. Well, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have to listen to me. It'd be a lot easier, right? But obviously that didn't happen. So we're put in this world. We struggle. We go through trials. We go through tribulations. It's darn hard, right? People have difficult lives. We have an evil inclination, trying to drive us batty, trying to get us to do all kinds of terrible things. But we're here in this world to be perfected, right? There's a certain minimal level, says the Ramchal in Derech Hashem. There's a certain minimal level a person has to reach in this world, and they have to do in order to have at least some level in the world to come. If they don't reach the minimal level, they're out, right? They're not going to make it. But the purpose of man in this world is really to perfect the world. Right now, when God created the world, was it a perfect world? It was a great world till we messed it up, right? But the purpose is to perfect it, to bring the world back where it was before Adam and Eve ate from the tree. Remember, there's only one time in history that the world went back to that. That was the giving of the Torah Mount Sinai. And then there was the sin of the golden calf. Everything went back down. So you have to wait for the Messiah to come. She comes speedily in our days, right? When the Messiah comes, we go back to that. But, it's been 2,000 years. It's been more, right? More than 2,000 years that we've been going through this. So every human being, every human has some sparks, right? We all have that spiritual spark inside of us to lift ourselves up. That's what the soul is. It's to be uplifted. How is it supposed to be uplifted? It's supposed to be uplifted by doing mitzvahs, by keeping Torah. So therefore, there are certain souls, right, expected to do even more, right? They're supposed to be on a higher level, doing things at a much different level. The Torah giants of the generation, they're living, in a different planet compared to us. They're learning, they're fixing up bad character traits, doing all kinds of things. So you got these unbelievable souls. So they do a lot of work, right? They do a lot of work, makes our lives easier in different ways. But what does that do? It affects these sparks, right? So therefore, you're going to say, so what's the deal with the mamzer? The mamzer comes from, a union that is forbidden, right? So the mamzer, even though he's got bad circumstances, right? The bad circumstances is he came out of a forbidden union. That's pretty bad. You can only marry certain people. Circumstances, right? Isn't one of the 617th, commandment, according to the Stooges, he's a victim of circumstance, right? So he's a victim of circumstance. What do you want from him? That's the way he's born. It's not his fault, right? It's not his fault. Oh, but over here, he can rise above. He can rise above his circumstances. He can study Torah. He's not outside the community, right? Right? What does the Torah tell me? Right? He's not going to enter the congregation. I mean, he can't marry, right? He can only marry someone in that same union, right? But he can study Torah. It's not forbidden to learn Torah, right? Being outside the community does not mean he can't learn Torah, right? Marrying is an issue. Learning Torah is not an issue. So he could reach a very high spiritual level. He could be given the most difficult of circumstances, right? He's born in a messed up situation. No question, not his fault, right? Or her fault, definitely not their fault. But that's the reality, right? He's born in those circumstances. So why is he born in those circumstances? Because now he's given a greater mission. What's the greater mission? The greater mission is some of the most daunting spiritual and circumstantial limitations. He's limited over here, not his fault, right? He can reach a higher level than a Kohen who's ignorant. He can learn. There are certain limitations. When a person is born in this world, God forbid, if they're born mentally challenged or other things, they're born and can affect their entire lives, affect others. They're born with limitations. When someone's born with limitations, whether it's physical or in our case, it's spiritual, right? It's a spiritual blemish. A spiritual blemish, a person can still rise to the cream of the crop, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go all the way down, but they have that ability. Give one other example, right? A non-Jewish man is married to a Jewish woman. Now they have children. Are the children Jewish? By a technicality. Why we go after the mother? It's a whole discussion. Go after the mother, go after the father. So we'll cut to the chase because I know you're not going to give me 45 minutes. So we'll cut to the chase. And the chase is, it's a Jew, right? The child is a Jew. But there's one caveat. Even though that the child's a Jew, that child has a spiritual blemish. What's the spiritual blemish? What I'll call, for lack of a better word, spiritual cooties. He's got this spiritual blemish. What's the spiritual blemish? The spiritual blemish is that the reality is that it should go through circumcision. So, not circumcision, sorry, it should go through conversion. Now, the reason is that since the father isn't Jewish, even though technically the child is going to be Jewish, but because it goes through the father as well, so there's a sort of blemish there. So I saw some of the later commentaries that discuss this and say if a person came from such a union, they should go in front of a rabbinical court and go through, quote unquote, a conversion and take that blemish off. Now, that doesn't mean, let's say a person doesn't want to do that, okay? Right? You don't have an obligation to do it, right? Spiritually speaking, again, we're speaking in spiritual terms, there is a blemish there even if we don't see it, right? If there's a blemish there, we don't see it, why wouldn't you take it off? Why wouldn't you want to, since you weren't conceived in the holiest of ways, right? Because the father's not Jewish, no offense, any non-Jews out there, but there's an issue. There's definitely an issue over here. If there's an issue, fix it up. So the commentaries tell us, yeah, it's a good thing to do. I asked my Rebbe about this. So he said, if we have someone who comes in front of us in our rabbinical court, that's what we tell them to do, right? We would tell them to go through a stringent conversion. They'll convert them, whatever, and you get rid of that blemish. Now, we don't see it. We don't fathom it. We don't necessarily know how that works, but it's not something you want to mess with, right? So, a person like that, again, it's like living in this world, having a hand tied behind your back. You're at a disadvantage, but spiritually speaking, you don't realize that you are at a disadvantage because you'll say, oh, abracadabra, it's all make-believe. Oh, it doesn't matter. Who cares? It's all spiritual mumbo jumbo, this, that. What's the difference? Right? But the soul feels it. And the soul can be held back. Right? A person can be held back in different ways from the inclination, from reaching potential in other ways by having the blemish. Right? So it's definitely a good thing. A person is in that situation. That's what they should do. Right? My Rebbe certainly holds to that. I don't think that's changed. Over the years, right? The same thing by the mamzer, right? The mamzer himself. We're not talking about conversion here, right? But the mamzer himself has the ability, because he's in a terrible situation, right? It's an extremely difficult situation. Look at the level that he can reach, right? That's an unbelievable thing. But you're gonna say, well, I didn't ask for that. You're right. I didn't ask for a lot of things, right? I might have done it to myself, or God says, you know what? I want you to work on this. And I want you to work on that. So I'm going to take a whole conglomerate of things. I'm going to go, boom, and I'm going to stick it inside you. Good luck, right? You have to get through the muck in order to get out of it. But you know what? Even if we've had very humble beginnings, imagine where we are now. Imagine how much we've learned. Imagine how much we've been inspired. My hat certainly goes out to William, everything that he does, and all the great rabbis that come and speak, and give her their time. And, I saw the post, wants to expand it. It's unbelievable getting out to the nations, and giving them what they really need. And that is undiluted Torah, right? To understand what my purpose in the world is, how I can lift myself up, even in the direst of circumstances. Again, no one grew up, with a silver spoon in their mouth. Maybe some did, some didn't. But, we've all gone through difficulties, in many, many different ways. But spiritually, the idea to get inspired, even if a person's been put in dire spiritual circumstances, does not mean in any way, shape, or form a person cannot overcome that, and raise themselves to higher spiritual levels. Right? That's not the case. Not saying it's easy, right? We're definitely not saying it's easy, right? But in the end, remember, the mamzer can be on a higher level than a Kohen that doesn't know anything, right? You're going to say, oh, come on, the mamzer, there's that. No, if he's got the knowledge, he can raise himself to unbelievable spiritual heights that this Kohen's not going anywhere, right? So he can reach himself to high spiritual heights, even though he's at a disadvantage. So we know many people have come out of Christianity. Many people become, Orthodox Jews that grew up secular. They have disadvantages, right? There's no question about it. The question is, do I feel sorry for myself, or do I get myself out of Dodge? Do I put myself up by my bootstraps? Hey, you live in Texas. Do I pick myself up by my bootstraps or not? Right? That's the question. And, we have an obligation, as much as possible to live, to live that life, to the best of our ability. I see him over here. One last thing, the Shari Chuvin, Gates of Repentance, he talks about in the third gate, he speaks about the end of the third gate, he speaks about different levels of the severity of our sins. He speaks about people who lose their portion of the world to come. I want to tell one caveat, one unbelievable thing. He says that someone who goes away from Torah, right? He calls them Ozve Torah. He goes away from Torah. He's not talking about secular Jews. He's talking about Jews that keep the Torah only through melumada. What does melumada mean? They do it by rote. When a Jew, he's not talking about someone secular. He said somebody like that who's going to keep the Torah only because he's afraid he's not going to fry in hell forever, and he's going to keep it, just by doing it by rote and not really living it, but, he's just doing it. That's akin to spiritual death. Right? So again, we may have different factors involved. Well, I don't do this, I don't do that. We've been born a certain way, given certain parents, certain circumstances, doesn't matter. Right? Whatever the circumstances are, we have that ability to uplift. Right? And who do we learn that from? We learn it no better from this mamzer. I got 20 more minutes? So we have that ability, right? We definitely have that ability. A person has to realize, right? A person has to realize that Rome wasn't built in a day. And, we have to work towards that. All the things we learn are all stepping stones, right? They're all building blocks. And when you take one building block, another building block, another building block over time, you're going to build a edifice. You're going to build something strong. And, that's the point. That's the point of listening to classes, of learning and being the great people we can be and reaching our potential.
Right on. Sorry, my mic was turned off. I kept talking. I was like, why is he not responding?
Oh, I got 20 minutes? Great.
All right. Good deal. Well, if that's everything, we're going to wrap it up.
I didn't even think I could get an hour out of that.
No, you did good. You did good. You were actually an hour and 3 minutes, so you did really well. Really well. Well, very cool, man. Well, we'll see you guys. All right. No news for you. I guess we're going to keep the same ball rolling each week. So trying to schedule something regularly, like at 7 o'clock every night for consistency, I think, is the key for YouTube and the way their algorithms work. I think the more consistent it can become, it makes it easier for web searches to come up. Which is part of the reason for the shift that I'm trying to do right now. Try to keep at least one show going at 7 o'clock every night, and then the other ones, like yours today, is at 1 p.m. And that'll stay there, one of the two. And there's several others there.
You can put me in there, craziness. If they put in craziness, my thing should show up. Outrageous, Coffman, right there.
Very true, very true. Good deal. All right, Rabbi. Well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your hard work as usual each week. And we'll talk to you next week. Shalom, everybody. Take care.